Is the Nikon Z 24 to 120mm underrated? Because I went on a landscape shoot the other day in the mountains and came back thinking, wait, this lens is actually good. So I came back and filmed this video to tell you guys all about my experience using this lens on my landscape shoot in the mountains. The other day, I went into the Los Angeles National Forest with just my Nikon Z6 III and 24 to 120 with the goal of capturing the beautiful mountain range with it. I wanted to get more testing with this lens because even though I've captured a ton of images, I haven't really dedicated time to shoot just landscape photography with it. Because for landscape photography, I tend to focus more on those wide focal lengths of 14mm if I wanted to capture something wide, or longer telephoto focal lengths of around 200 to 400 for subjects that are farther away. But with the 24 to 120 having more of a normal focal range, I wanted to see how it performed for landscape photography. On this shoot, I really wanted to focus more on the valley and showcasing the ravine down below. However, I ran into a bit of an issue. You see, I had to shoot this on the side of the road where there's so many different subjects right below. This caused some unwanted shrubbery and bushes to get into the way of my composition. And even though it could make a nice inclusion, it seemed like too much, especially since there were trees that took up much of this space. Luckily, this is where having the normal focal range of the 24 to 120 really came in handy, since this focal length gave me plenty of flexibility to remove the unwanted shrubbery by zooming in just a little bit. This gives me a more pure shot of the ravine, while still getting plenty of it into the frame, since I was using a relatively normal focal length. Normally, I'd use a much wider focal length of around 14mm or so. But for this shot in particular, it worked out that the 24 to 120 could capture this scene while getting the composition I wanted. Because if I were to use a wider focal length, I'd have to find a way to include the shrubbery without it being distracting. But since we were using the 24 to 120, this wasn't an issue, and we could isolate the ravine more since we zoomed in just a tad. During the shoot, I ended up using a lot of different focal lengths, and the flexibility of the 24 to 120 just gave me so many different options to choose from. I ended up with two shots in the normal focal range, this photo at 33mm and another shot at 74mm. But let's focus in on the 33mm photo for now. And like I mentioned before, my goal with this image was to try to get a clean shot of the ravine down below. And because we were using 33mm, it allowed me to enlarge the ravine and make it take up more of the frame as a result, versus a wide angle lens. I was able to make this water below a bigger part and showcase it running through the valley. And that's why having that normal focal length and almost being forced to use it worked out really well for when I was shooting mountain photography, as you're still able to get plenty of your elements into the frame while being more intentional about which elements take priority. It's why it doesn't feel that bad just using the 24 to 120 for landscape photography, as it can capture just such vast landscapes, but gives you the flexibility to fine-tune your composition whenever you want to showcase certain elements. Because let's say you're using a 14mm lens, you have to craft your compositions with every element in mind. It's difficult to exclude certain elements since you're capturing everything, and puts you in this mindset that you have to arrange a composition with all the elements. But with the 24 to 120, you can be more selective about what you include or exclude, and allows you to put more of your focus on the elements that you want to showcase. And that's why I'd argue that the 24 to 120 forces you to be more intentional about the compositions you're crafting versus something like a super telephoto focal length or like a 14mm on the wide end. It's definitely challenged me as a photographer, and I think is why this lens would make such a great single lens setup for landscape photography. Because even though having 24 and 120mm is great to go wide or telephoto, it really is those middle focal lengths that give you so many options when capturing your landscapes. Being able to use those wider focal lengths while being selective about what elements you include in there is so key when using this lens. But of course, I didn't just capture images that are wide. I decided to zoom in a bit to 74mm to capture this image of the ravine and the gorgeous colors in the sky. To me, 74mm made sense, because if I went too wide here, it'd be difficult to isolate the ravine and bring out the colors and subjects that I wanted to showcase. I was able to still showcase the ravine and any of the elements that I wanted to include, like the vast LA landscape past the valley and the intersecting mountain ranges to the left and right. And at this point in the day, the sun went down quite a bit, and gave me plenty of room to bring out the many colors in the sky with vibrant oranges, red, yellows, and pinks. But putting aside the focal length or how the photos actually came out, the 24-120 is just such a joy to use for landscape photography, especially since this is great as a one lens type of setup. Having just this lens takes away the distraction of trying to decide what lenses to use or worrying about bringing more gear than is necessary on a shoot. It allows me to focus more on my composition and how I actually want to capture the image. And because the 24-120 is so lightweight and small, it balanced perfectly with the Z6 III and made it a pleasure to use with my Oben BE117 ball head. Using the 24-120mm was such a nice experience, and I think if you were wanting to be more of a minimalistic type of photographer and only carry one lens on a shoot, I think this would be a great pick. I think this mountain shoot was such a great example of this, as this lens checked off so many boxes that you would want in a landscape lens, like focal length flexibility, great handling, and amazing focal length. And even though this lens did such a great job when it came to the focal length department, now let's go behind the computer and see just how good the images are. So now what I want to do is go right behind the computer and talk about kind of the more finer things about image quality like sharpness, chromatic aberration, micro contrast, and actually look at the images more in detail. So the first image that I actually want to look at is this one right here. And if we take a look at something like chromatic aberration, right, is where you see that purple and green tints, the fringing kind of on the edges where you see areas of high contrast, I think the 24-70 or 24-120, sorry, actually does quite a good job at maintaining the sense of like, you know, there's not going to be that much color fringing. It looks super clean. Obviously there's like a little here, but this is exactly where the sun was. And so it's a little, it is to be expected. But I mean, if you look at all the other areas of the image, it just looks super clean, super crisp. And this is especially nice for landscape photography in particular, because when you're shooting landscapes, scenes like this are quite common. And so not having to worry too much about the chromatic aberration really makes it a lot easier to capture these kind of images and not have to worry that, you know what, my images are just going to be completely blown out, completely unusable. And I mean, if we look at the other images, the same can kind of be said here. Even with this one being a little bit brighter, the chromatic aberration really doesn't show through that much, especially as we go through the mountain range here. And as we turn our heads more towards sharpness, this is going to be something that's a little bit difficult to kind of use these images as an indicator of, because if you just look at this before and after, I mean, like, this is just such a tough image to edit. So sharpness will take a hit when it comes to dynamic range, especially. But if we even just zoom in a little, the image actually looks pretty good considering where it was. Granted, these all were captured in HDRs, so we are able to get a little bit more detail, a little more dynamic range, make sure the image doesn't have as much noise when editing it, and it actually looks pretty good. We're getting as much details as we possibly can, and at a certain point, it really isn't the lens's issue. It's more just like, you know, these areas were just really dark before. Before after this, I mean, this is completely pitch black, brought up quite a bit. We shot all these at f8 in order to get the most depth of field possible when shooting an image like this. Make sure we get much of the frame in focus, and I think f8 was perfect for this shoot in particular. Everything looks pretty good, pretty clean. Even if we move on to maybe this image here, like, we can just grab so much of this detail out in the distance, and the only reason that we really can't get any more detail is because of these atmospheric conditions that kind of get in the way, and plus we're really far from this area in particular. But the images and the details that we can resolve here, we're able to get quite a bit of detail. And it's really nice because, I mean, you're expecting that kind of image quality from an S-line level lens. And especially the 24-120 actually does a great job when it comes to sharpness in particular. And in my opinion, I think rivals the old 24-70 f2.8. And the other thing I really talk about is like micro contrast, but I think these images are really hard to talk about in particular because, I mean, if you just look at the before, I mean, it's just absolutely cooked. And if we just zoom in and try to see where the micro contrast is, everything just looks really flat. I think it's just because the area in general was just really dark with this bright sky. So, but honestly, I think image quality wise, I'm pretty happy with how the 24-120 comes out. I would argue that this lens is probably one of the best landscape lenses if you're looking at pure image quality. I mean, the photos come out really crisp, really detailed, and especially with that limited chromatic aberrations, be able to shoot in these high contrast scenes and not have to worry about purple and green color fringing. So yeah, let's go right back into what the other parts of the video we're talking about. Let's talk about why I think this is actually a great lens for landscape photography. I personally think that the 24-120mm is a bit of an underrated lens for landscape photography. It's a lens I never really thought about using for landscape photography, but has definitely impressed me in these past couple of shoots. I was personally a photographer that felt like landscapes had to be captured at those extreme focal lengths. Whether it was super wide at 14mm or very telephoto at 400mm, because having those extreme focal lengths gave me coverage like no other focal length could give. But since starting using the 24-120, I realized just how great of a landscape lens it is. The flexibility by itself gave me so much room to capture compositions that were more detailed in terms of what elements I decided to include. It forced me to be more intentional when crafting my compositions and choosing what to isolate in my landscape photo. Especially on this shoot where I had to decide whether to keep or remove the shrubbery at the bottom or what focal length to use to showcase the vibrant sunset. And even putting aside the focal length, the 24-120 just handles so well and feels very natural to use on shoot. And especially being a lens that you only need to bring the one lens makes it easy to pack my bag and be more minimalistic out on shoot. I think for me, the 24-120 will be the lens that I bring out on more of a casual type of landscape shoot. It'll be perfect in my 3-liter sling as a one lens setup where my focus is to be lightweight and compact. The 24-120 is a lens I will continue to use more for landscape photography and will most likely be a lens that I am more intentional about in terms of bringing it out on shoot. But what do you think about the 24-120? Is this a lens that you would use for landscape photography? Let me know down in the comment section down below. And I also created an editing video to go along with this one that showcases how I edited these photos in a high contrast sort of scene. So if you want to check it out, make sure to see down below the join icon where I have exclusive content for my landscape photography. Anyways, thank you so much for experiencing the world with me today. I'll catch you guys in the next one.